Welcome to Stage Explorations, where we interview the theater creatives and artists from the theater world, those who perform on stage that the audience sees, and those behind the theater stage that the audience almost never sees. I am a journalist and theater fan, Buell Brown, and today's guest is...
My name is Luke Yankee. Yes, it's my real name. I am a playwright, a director, an actor, a producer, and a theater professor. And I am very excited to talk to you today about my play, Marilyn, Mom, and Me, about my mother, the Oscar-winning actress Eileen Heckart, and her intense friendship with Marilyn Monroe during the shooting of Bus Stop. Listen to this interview to find out more.
My first question is, when did you first fall in love with theater, and why did you have to be part of the theater world?
I almost feel like I didn't have a choice in the matter. I mean, of course I did, but my mother was the actress Eileen Heckart, who was in the Theater Hall of Fame and who won an Academy Award for the film Butterflies Are Free, and 5 Tony nominations, 2 Emmys, a Golden Globe. And so from the time I was a very little boy, I said, "Mommy, I want to do what you do." And at first she said, "Oh, honey, no, you don't," because she knew what a tough life it was and tried to discourage me. But once she saw that I was serious about it and that there was no stopping me, she and my father were both very supportive.
So my next question is, when did you fall in love with writing, and when did it go from an interest to an obsession?
My obsession with writing really began, I trace it back to when I was a kid. I wrote a piece in grade school that I recently came across about a year or two ago called Wally Waterfall. And it was about this waterfall that was traveling all over the world, trying to meet his perfect lady waterfall and trying to get to Niagara Falls so we could be a part of it. And just, a silly piece of kids writing. But I look back on that and I think, there was something sort of honest and truthful and sweet about that kind of propelled me in a way. And I started out as an actor. I studied acting at Juilliard. I was a member of all of the theatrical unions by the time I was 15. And when I sort of really kind of stumbled into playwriting, I really felt like I was wearing shoes that fit for the first time. And I'm proud of the fact that I have 6 published plays and a memoir and actually a book on writing called The Art of Writing for the Theater. And I also am the head of playwriting at Cal State Fullerton, and I also teach playwriting at Chapman University. So I am well steeped in the world of the scribes.
I'm flipping my script a little bit because you're went into that one thing about playwriting more. What is your process in creating a play, and why is that unique format you love writing in?
I think playwriting as a format really is best for me because since I started out as an actor and since my background is very much in the theater, it's, of course, I've written screenplays and television scripts that have won some awards and such, but I feel like the theater is a medium that really, really speaks to me. And there's just something about the immediacy of a live audience, It's with my memoir, Just Outside the Spotlight, I'll get emails and letters from people many, many years afterwards saying how moved they were by it and how much it meant to them. But there's something about the immediacy as a playwright of hearing that audience response. And just all of a sudden, it's like, oh, that line works. That did get a laugh. Or just hearing the audience fighting back sniffles and sobs if they're moved by what you're writing. And I've been fortunate enough to have had all of those experiences. So I really feel like of all the mediums I write in, that playwriting is the one that is really where my heart lies.
You start answering my next question, actually. The theater experience, why is it such a unique format for both the actors and the audience to experience?
The theater is such a unique environment. The theater is such a unique environment because there is a sense of, well, I think of the storytellers around the fireplace in very, very ancient times, and that ritualistic sense of passing on a story, passing on a legacy, that sort of thing. And I think one has that in the theater in a way that one really doesn't in any other medium.
Before we get to your play, tell us about your Just Outside the Spotlight book and why you needed to rewrite it.
Just Outside the Spotlight was very much a labor of love. And when I was a little boy, I would sit at my mother's feet as she would be entertaining the likes of Mary Tyler Moore or Teresa Wright or Pulitzer Prize winning playwrights like Robert Anderson and Tad Moselle. And I would just soak up all of these stories like a sponge. And it was kind of odd for the adults sometimes. It's like, who's this little boy who's just sitting here hanging on our every word? But that was what I did from a very young age. And I knew my mother would never write a book and had no desire to do so. And her greatest fear was that she thought that one couldn't write a book about a celebrity without it being salacious or without it being mommy dearest. And we did not have that kind of relationship, nor would I have ever written that kind of a book. So the fact that I was able to write this book combining my mother's career and our relationship, and to some extent my career, and the book goes up until my mother's death, because it really is her career from my perspective. And from sitting and hearing all these amazing stories over the years, I'm incredibly proud of it. And Mary Tyler Moore wrote the foreword to it. And it really is one of the most satisfying things I've ever done in my life.
And what would you want the readers to get out of this book?
What I would want the readers to get out of Just Outside the Spotlight is a sense of the up and down career of a character actress, the very specific relationship that my mother and I had. And of course, I talk a lot about that in Marilyn, Mom and Me as well, which we'll get to, I know. But it's a son's love letter to his mother, who happened to be an Academy Award winning actress. I think that's the best way to say it.
So where did the idea come from for your play, Marilyn, Mom and Me? And why did you have to write this personal play?
So from the time I was very young, when my parents would have parties, or in later years when my brothers and I would have parties, and my mother would sort of start down the path of telling her showbiz tales, which she loved to do. She loved to hold court. If people would say, Eileen, what was it like working with Marilyn Monroe? She would get very quiet and she would get very tight-lipped. And if people pressed the issue and she really started talking about Marilyn, invariably she wound up in tears. And my mother was known for playing these kind of hard-boiled, crusty, tough customers, which was really very much what she was like in many ways. Of course, that was a facade. I mean, she was a jellyfish underneath, if anyone really stood up to her. But she loved to sort of play the kind of brusque, tell them all to go to hell kind of characters. So the fact that she would burst into tears every time she talked about Marilyn Monroe up until the day she died was really profound to me. And I knew bits and pieces of her stories about Marilyn and working on Bus Stop, but I really started doing some research on that. And I was directing a production and in Manhattan Beach, and I vowed to myself, I was listening to audiobooks about Marilyn Monroe all summer long, and I vowed to myself as soon as the play was over that I would hole up at my place in Palm Springs in the August heat and would not come out until I had a draft of this play. So I started realizing more and more as I put various pieces together that when Marilyn Monroe shot the film A Bus Stop, where my mother was cast as her best friend, at this point, Marilyn was the biggest star in the world. And she had taken the year off, the year before that, to study in New York with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio. And she had become the epitome of the method actress, where one has to feel everything organically. And since my mother was playing her best friend, Marilyn was determined, as the ultimate method actress, to make my mother her best friend. And at first, it made my mother very uncomfortable, and she was thinking, who's this starlet who's kind of glomming onto me and making me feel very uncomfortable? But ultimately, the two of them really bonded through their wounds. And both women were adopted. And as a result of that, among many other things, for all that they both achieved, Marilyn in films and my mother mostly on Broadway, neither one of them ever felt that they truly deserved a place at the table. There was always that sense of the missing piece, always that sense of, I'm not worthy of this. And so in this play, Marilyn, Mom and Me, the premise that I have set up is that a 40-something Luke learns early on in the play that his mother is terminal with lung cancer, which indeed happened right around the time of my 40th birthday. And so, in order to get at some basic truths about their relationship before his mother dies, he is unraveling her complex relationship with Marilyn Monroe and interviewing her about Marilyn and really getting at the essence of why this woman always made her cry every time she talked about her. So it is a deeply personal play. I am very emotionally exposed in this play because, backtracking a little bit, when I holed up in Palm Springs in the heat of August to write the play, and I said, I'm not going to come out until it's finished. Well, within 3 days, I had a very solid first draft. The play just came pouring out of me. And so I realized so many things about my mother and about her relationship with Marilyn Monroe. So I kind of go back and forth between these two stories. I set out to write a play about my mother and Marilyn, and I wound up writing a play that was every bit as much about my mother and me. So thus the title Marilyn, Mom and Me, because ultimately it is a son making peace with his very complex relationship with his mother through the lens of the chaotic world of movie making with one of the biggest stars in the world at that time.
Let's talk about because I think you did cover the characters, but is it easier or more difficult to write a play that's so personal to the playwright?
I think in some ways it is easier to write a play that is so personal, and in other ways it's more difficult. It's and one of the things that I learned when I wrote the memoir, Just Outside the Spotlight, again, because it's a memoir, it's a deeply personal story, there would be times that my husband would get up and I'd be sitting at the computer sobbing, going, nobody's going to give a damn about this. And it's such a personal time. And one of the things I realized, and as the head of playwriting at Cal State Fullerton, this is something I tell to my students, the more personal you make a story, the more universal it becomes. Because when the book came out and I thought, oh, well, this is such a personal story, it's going to sell about 3 copies. I got letters from people all over the world saying, your relationship with your mother was just like my relationship with my Uncle George or my father-in-law or whatever it was. So again, because personal emotions are universal. And one of the things I explore in Marilyn, Mom and Me is that whole sense of these two women, Eileen Heckart and Marilyn Monroe, who on the surface were so totally different. I mean, Marilyn was so fragile and vulnerable, and my mother had the appearance, at least, of being very much a hard-boiled, flinty, tough cookie. But ultimately, they both wanted to be loved. They both wanted to be accepted. And at the time, as I mentioned, Marilyn was one of the biggest stars in the world, and yet she wanted what my mother had. She wanted a stable marriage. She wanted kids. and she wanted to be taken seriously as a legitimate actress. And the year before they shot Bus Stop, my mother had won the Golden Globe and had been nominated for an Academy Award for a film called The Bad Seed, which she had also done on Broadway, where she's playing an alcoholic woman whose son has been murdered. And she only has 8 minutes in the entire film, and it's absolutely gut-wrenching. I mean, and Marilyn strove to be that kind of actress. And I think it's sort of ironic in retrospect that many people do consider Bus Stop one of her best performances, if not her very best performance. And there is an even deeper level of vulnerability in her performance. And she has so many scenes with my mother that I kind of like to think that maybe the chemistry between Marilyn and my mother somehow contributed to that. And another thing I'd like to share about this particular project is, needless to say, there are thousands of things written about Marilyn Monroe. And so people often ask, well, Luke, what are you contributing that is new? Well, there is very little that is written about Marilyn's relationship with another woman. There is so much written about her relationships with JFK and Arthur Miller and her acting teachers, who were female, by the way, and on and on and on. But there really isn't anything else out there, to my knowledge, about another woman who was a contemporary and someone with whom she really bonded on such a deep level, even though it was for a short period of time, as often happens in show business. But it was a connection that really changed my mother's life. And as I explore in the play, ultimately, it changed mine as well and helped me to understand my mother on a deeper level.
What do you want the audience to get out of your play?
What I want the audience to get out of this play, boy, there's a great deal. That's a challenging question. But basically, I want them to see another side of Marilyn because it also shows Marilyn not in any way as a victim. It shows her as a shrewd businesswoman, a brilliant actress, and someone who really understood the camera and her own image in an extraordinary way. I want them to get out of the play the sense of this very complex mother-son relationship. And ultimately, it is, I mean, while I paint Marilyn and Luke and Eileen kind of warts and all, it is by no means an expose. It is by no means a negative story in that sense. It's ultimately a son coming to peace with his mother who's passed away. And while he might not have agreed with some of her choices in parenting at the time, ultimately he learns to see where they were coming from, the good intentions behind them, and he's able to forgive his mother on a deeper level because ultimately forgiveness is a gift you give yourself.
What are you looking forward when you're sitting down in the theater and watching your play?
This is the most important play I have ever done. And I have been directing plays and writing plays for, more than 40 years now. And this one is so important to me. I mean, it's the pinnacle for me, if you will. And because it's such a deeply personal story, there have been times in rehearsals for the various readings and workshops and other productions where I've actually sort of gone, oh, I really said that, didn't I? I'm being so vulnerable and so exposed in this play. But frankly, I feel like that is where some of the best art comes from. Because, one of the examples that comes to mind, while my story is certainly totally different, is Torch Song Trilogy, where Harvey Fierstein wrote this play about his lover dying of AIDS and about his very tough relationship with his mother and how she could never accept his sexuality. And just ultimately, that was a deeply personal story for Harvey, who actually is a friend of mine. But also, because of the fact that it was such a deeply personal story, it became so universal, as I said before. So I'm really excited after several years of workshops and readings and such, and to really get this play out into the world. I'm really, really excited about Marilyn, Mom and Me. And so we're just holding the happy thought that it has a long and healthy life ahead of it.
What do you think will surprise the theater audience watching your play?
What I think would surprise an audience member watching this play is really the things one learns about Marilyn Monroe. Because at this stage of the game, people tend to think, what new information could there possibly be about Marilyn Monroe? But I think people, as I said before, they see a side of Marilyn they haven't seen before. They see the side of her that wanted to be a wonderful mother, the side of her that was such a good businesswoman. And because Marilyn didn't have many female friends, because a lot of women were threatened by her because of the blatant sexuality and because of just how men were just so smitten with her. So to see her relationship with another woman who was an equal and who was a peer in many ways, uh, it really gives a unique perspective on her that I think people will appreciate.
I know this is a softball question, but I always ask,
Sure.
where do you hope this play or story goes? Broadway or TV? Where do you hope this goes?
I want to take this as far as it possibly can. I have also started work on the screenplay. I think it could make a terrific film for Netflix or Amazon Prime or something like that. And I also have one of the producers who is interested, uh, thinks it would be very successful on Broadway. And I've had a number of major agents and producers and such say the same thing to me.
Why should or must the theater audience and beyond attend the play production of Marilyn, Mom and Me?
I feel people should come see Marilyn, Mom and Me because, at the risk of sounding egocentric, it's a very important play. It shows a side of Marilyn Monroe that people have not seen before. It certainly shows many sides of Eileen Heckart, an important actress in the American theater and in film and television that many people have not seen before. And one learns so much, not only about the relationship between these two women and about Marilyn's career and about Marilyn as a businesswoman and as an actress, but also the mother-son relationship, which is something very universal. And the fact of this son desperately seeking acceptance and love from a woman who is also trying to find those same things. It is very funny. It is very moving. It is a real heartfelt Valentine to the world of movie making, to the theater, to actresses, and to mothers and sons all over the world. I think it will be a very enriching and rewarding experience for everyone involved. It is a real heartfelt Valentine to the world of movie making, to the theater, to actresses, and to mothers and sons all over the world. I think it will be a very enriching and rewarding experience for everyone involved.
Because you did mention your new book. For those people who are writers and want to become playwrights, tell us about your book and how both new playwrights and current playwrights could use your book.
Great. So my book that came out about 2 years ago, called The Art of Writing for the Theater, is an introduction to playwriting, theater criticism, and script analysis. Not necessarily in that order, but because of the fact that I was writing this book during the pandemic, in addition to the how-to sections on each of those areas, I also have interviews with 18 world-class, Pulitzer Prize winning, Tony winning playwrights, lyricists, theater critics, people like Ben Brantley from the New York Times, and the playwright of M. Butterfly, David Henry Hwang, Marcia Norman, who won the Pulitzer Prize for Night Mother, David Lindsay Abaire, who wrote the book and lyrics for Kimberly Akimbo. Just an extraordinary lineup of artists who generously contributed to this book. And every one of those interviews was like a masterclass for me. So I have passed that along through various sections on, for instance, I'll talk about the art of collaboration. And then I'll have a section on Marcia Norman talking about various collaborations she had had over the years and collaborating on writing the book for The Color Purple, the musical. So I feel like it's a really important book. I'm happy to say it's selling very well. And it's gotten, as I mentioned earlier, it's gotten endorsements from everyone like Stephen Schwartz to the Tony-winning actress of Into the Woods, Joanna Gleason, 9-time Tony nominee Scott Ellis, one of the top directors on Broadway, and really just some extraordinary theater artists. And I think there is something in this book for everyone, for both beginning writers, playwrights, lyricists, and critics, and also established people as well. My name is Luke Yankee. Yes, it's my real name. I am a playwright, a director, an actor, a producer, and a theater professor. And I am very excited to talk to you today about my play, Marilyn, Mom, and Me, about my mother, the Oscar-winning actress Eileen Heckart, and her intense friendship with Marilyn Monroe during the shooting of Bus Stop. You can find out more about the play on my website, marilynmomandme.com. That's and all spelled out, or through my other website where I talk about my other projects and my other books, which is lukeyankee.com. That's LUKEYANKEE.com, just the way it sounds. I'll see you at the theater.
Thank you for listening or watching this podcast episode of Stage Explorations. To learn more about the theater creative and more theater creatives and artists on Stage Explorations, go to www.stageexplorations.com. Once again, that is www.stageexplorations.com. There is no space between stage and explorations. You may find more videos, podcasts, and information about this theater creative and other theater creatives and artists on Stage Explorations YouTube channel. Looking forward to seeing you in the theater.